Welcome to another episode of the Vikingology podcast. I'm co-host number one, CJ Adrian.
And I'm co-host number two, Terry Barnes. And I have a cold today, so I must apologize for my voice, my scratchy voice. But today we're going to have fun, and that is a good thing. We have Dr. Irina Manea, who is coming to us from Germany, but she is a native of Romania, and she has a University of Bucharest degree in Norse mythology. And though we're going to talk about a more interesting sliver of that sort of worldview and belief because we're going to look at we probably should have done this around Halloween, to be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah,
Yeah,
definitely
we're
fit. Yeah.
gonna let's
Mm.
look at
Wait,
magic, let's look at ghosts,
no, no.
Dreiger, let's look at
Yule
revenants.
is perfect. Yule is when the
Yule.
Dregger
Yeah,
come
it
out.
works too. Yeah,
Yeah,
these
there you go.
liminal
Okay.
times.
Yeah. So, and I love this about you too. On your bio, it says your favorite film and book is Lord of the Rings. And so you're kind of
Yeah,
steeped in a lot of the more interesting aspects of these myths that come from the Viking Age. So I think that's
yeah.
pretty
I
cool.
basically grew up with Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, so I'm from
Nice.
that generation, from the 90s generation. So but it was
And
different
so
with me because I come from a very non-traditional place where we don't really have Old Norse studies. So yeah, I basically tried to like forge my own path, so to speak. And I was actually out of academia for a couple of years, because yeah, for reasons I'm not going to go into now. But the fact that I returned sort of like fits the topics I am mostly interested right now because Revenant.
yeah.
So yeah, I think that's why I find them like very fascinating characters, and the way they can embody the particular tensions in society and religious tensions as well. I think it's very fascinating aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, and you and I did a little kind of chat together that it was only a chat, but then we decided to record it and throw it out there so people can check that out too. And we talked a little bit about trying to discover who Scandinavian people were through the sagas a
Mm.
little bit. But we branched a little bit wider than just this kind of ghosts and the supernatural and stuff. So I think that'll be fun for today. And then I'll give CJ a lot of fodder for his books. And also, she's in Germany, so beware, people. CJ's probably going to whip out the German accent at some point
And the
in this.
jokes. And the jokes that the Germans will not find funny.
Once again,
Yeah.
sorry to our German audience.
Did I tell this story on the podcast before where I was in a French class? I was substitute teaching. This is years ago. I was teaching a French class to some high schoolers, and the lesson plan wasn't very specific on what I was supposed to do, but I kind of figured it out. And so the teacher wanted me to draw like a circle and a line and on the board, and then just tell the students, all right, so now you take this shape and then use it as inspiration to draw a scene that you will then describe to your partner in French. And the kids are like, we really don't get it. And I was like, okay, well, then I shall model the behavior for you as good teachers do. So I drew the circle and the line. Now, I'm not a very good artist, but I tried my best and I thought, what does that look like? It looks like a lamppost. So I put a little tree next to it and I put some buildings in the back and I was like, aha, this looks like the park in Central Park. And then I drew a little bench and I put little uh, the chess boards, the people who play chess, in Central Park.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
then I mean, as far as I know, there's a very prominent Orthodox Jewish community there. So I chose somebody with the little, and then, oh, Mr. Adrian, that's racist. I was like, it's not racist. Those people really do play chess in that park. It's a real thing. And they're like, no, you can't do that. No, no, no. I was like, oh, just, you know what? I tried. I showed you what to do. Draw a scene and and do it to your partners. And then the classroom went completely quiet. And I said, and besides, I'm not German.
Okay.
Okay. The children, like one kid laughed, one. So I was like, okay, thanks. Tough crowd, tough crowd. So I go sit down, and then there's an exchange student from Mali who was there, and he thought I was funny. So anyway, the class goes, and then at the very end, sorry, I missed the most critical piece of my whole joke. As I sat down, the class is extremely quiet, and the kids didn't laugh, and I said, "Gosh, you must all be German, no sense of humor." And then again, nobody laughed. And then the look, the Germans are fair game. Come on, and, and especially in French. Come on. But the kid from Mali thought I was funny. He thought I was hilarious. So next thing you know, class ends, all the kids leave, and then this little 5'2" blonde, blue-eye Fraulina comes up and she goes, "Hello, Mr. Adrian. My name is Maria. I'm the German exchange student." And I was like, "Oh, hello, Maria. It's very nice to meet you. What can I help you with?" She said, "I heard your joke and I did not think it was funny." And she turned
Oh,
around and left the classroom. And the exchange student from Mali and I were looking at each other and just started laughing because she proved my point. But
Yeah,
anyway,
reinforcement
how
of
old are these
stereotypes.
people? How old?
like 17, 18.
Oh, okay, okay.
These are seniors in high school. And for context, by the way, when I first started doing that, I was like 21,
Oh,
so I wasn't much
jeez.
older than those kids.
Oh
Yeah,
my God.
I graduated with a master's very, very young. But anyway, so yeah, that was just it's one of my favorite
Oh my.
stories to tell because I have a lot of friends in Germany who have wonderful sense of humor, by the way. So it's I yeah. We had a German exchange student when I was in high school named Ben, and the guy, I mean, he was one of the funniest people I've ever met. He was like Robin Williams but with a German accent. It was great. Anyway, so
Yeah,
I'm so
I
sorry,
can't really
Irina.
confirm that, but so yeah.
Oh,
Oh my
just
God.
just
There,
shovel it
we,
in
we
there,
we have fun in
Irina.
different ways, so to speak. Yeah.
All right, Terry,
All
you should
right.
ask a real question.
Um, let's see. Well, I mean, okay, actually, when you said it just at the beginning, that like the tension with religion and stuff like that. So, um, is as far as the Icelandic sagas are concerned, sorry, I'm like my cold head here. I'm just formulating a thought. But as far as the Icelandic sagas are concerned, I mean, we know that they converted to Christianity around the year 1000. And so, I mean, is there
According to the narrative that was kept, but yeah.
right? Yeah, 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 right. Which, that's all we got. So I'm going with that. The how does it come out? How do these ghosts and revenants are there, because there's many sagas. Is there kind of
Mm.
a trope? Is there a sort of a stock kind of, oh, that's the ghost character and this is the sort of the function that they play in the story kind of thing?
Yeah, right. So Christianization was definitely a milestone, and we do have a lot of episodes that deal with these religious tensions in society. Like, for example, you have in the Vinland sagas a couple of characters who apparently come back because they're not buried on consecrated ground. So that's sort of tension in society. And then you also have tensions resulting from the fact that these were Icelanders, Christians, Christian Icelanders writing about their ancestors. So the main question here is how do we integrate in the story of the formation of our nation? How do we integrate our ancestors who were pagans? And we do have a couple of examples of how people were buried. And I can think of Egil, for example, as Egil, who is initially buried with clothes and weapons, so very pagan-like burial, but then he's later taken to church. When he's taken to church, he's not really buried like near the church or inside the church. He is buried by the outer edge of the church. So there is this really tension going on related to the fact that authors are really trying to find the place of these ancestors in the stories. And sometimes the undead, they are depicted as being either people of foreign origin, for example, from the Hebrides, or settlers who came late and they took part very late in this process of land taking. And I can think of Thorolfur from Erbia saga, who's probably one of the most aggressive characters, revenant characters that you can find in the sagas. So there is a tendency from the authors to depict these people in a certain way as foreigners or as people who really don't fit society one way or another. In the same saga, we have the character Thorgunna, for example, who is indeed Christian. So at first glance, you would say this is a person who could not be a revenant because she's not a pagan. So why would she come back? But she is also described as being someone who does not get along with the others, who is a little bit of a misfit in that sort of society. So I think this also has to do a lot with the rules and regulations, like the social compromise the people have forged in order for the society to function. So revenants, in a way, they are questioning those rules, norms, and regulations, and in a way, they're also forcing people to confront both their present and their past.
Okay, so that makes me think of just kind of cross-culturally too, then. I would imagine you'd probably, in most human societies, if it's going to serve that kind of function of here's the other,
Yeah.
and that kind
Mhm.
of thing, like that there's probably similar tropes in other traditions,
Yeah,
in other
yeah,
other
right.
other places.
They're
Yeah,
very
yeah.
transgressive characters. So if we look at monster theory, for example, which was already theorized in the 90s, Jeffrey Cohen, for example, you're going to realize that these monsters, they really are transgressive characters because they're very liminal. So they are at the border of society in a way, but then they're also between paganism and Christianity. So from a religious perspective, and of course, they're also between life and death. So they're very, very difficult to categorize.
Okay, so yeah, so David Zori, who you may or may not
Mm.
know, but he worked
I
on
have his book.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
on my
yeah.
reading list. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a friend of the show, and he's a personal friend of mine, and he did a lot of digging at Egil's so-called grave and church and stuff there in Iceland, and so he knows quite a bit about that. But he's the person from whom I've learned the little bit that I know about what these revenants were, and the way he described them, it would be people that maybe died under shameful circumstances somehow, but that they, yeah, like you said, that they're liminal, where they can't fully pass into the next life, but they can't come back into this life, and so they're viewed as being sort of angry and frustrated because of that, and so then that, at least partially for that reason, they can
Mm.
kind of be troublemakers, and so they're kind of destined to kind of walk the earth as these sort of, yeah. Well, for us, kind of in sort of American culture, I mean, the zombies were a big deal here in the last few years or so,
Hey, I
and
come from the land of vampires, so
yeah,
if
exactly. And it was vampires before that, right? Twilight and all that.
And
So
and
werewolves.
yeah,
yeah, and they're
yeah.
quite
So
vampiric. Yeah, I think the problem here is that we really have this obsession with categorizing stuff, and if we look at later folklore as well, vampires and werewolves were really not that different. I mean, they were kind of like lumped together. That evolution towards different categories came only later. And I also noticed that in some of the Icelandic sagas where you do have this idea of contagion. Yeah, like in Gretti's saga, again, one of the very violent revenants who is Glomur, who also casts a curse upon the main character, upon Grettir the Strong. It is specifically told that there was some sort of unnamed entity causing this contagion at the farm. So we do have traces of vampirism in that kind of story as well. But coming back to what you said earlier, the aggressive ones are only one part of the story because in some of these sagas, it's actually the living who bother the dead and don't let them rest in peace. And it's generally because they want something from them. Because if you are, let's say, an ancient king buried in this grand mound, you most likely have a great deal of treasure with you, and you most likely have some sort of genealogical connection that you also want to resort to. And this is again also part of this larger trope in a lot of folklore stories about the quest of the hero. So the hero has to, among other things, has to go and wrestle some sort of monster, and one of the monsters is the revenant. And I particularly like a story called Bardar Saga, who is actually made up of two stories. The first part deals with Bardar, who again is also some kind of monster because he's this trollish human-like creature. And then there is the story of his son, and his son called Gester. He has a very appealing story about descending into the tomb of such a revenant called Ragnar, and Ragnar is described as this very ancient king of Helluland, surprisingly. And you have all kinds of supernatural elements there, from the idea that the mount won't open to the necessity of hiring a priest to cleanse the land from all kinds of trolls and spirits. And then he finally enters the mount, and he does that alone. And he seeks this ancient king, and he finds him in a huge ship with a lot of other undead around him, I think 500 or something like that. And then they have to wrestle because you cannot use a weapon against these creatures. And there is also some kind of magical candle. There are a lot of supernatural elements. So in the end, to cut a long story short, this revenant is decapitated, and then the hero performs his quest and can gain a lot of glory following that. And then you have all the stories where you can even acquire some kind of magical object, such as a sword, or something similar that is going to help you in further quests. So
Hmm. I I
yeah.
want to come back to this idea of the contagion piece of it. Um, it's just a thought that crossed my mind. I'm thinking of the bubonic plague, how they had these spirits or kind of grim reaper type people in the mist outside of their fields before the plague would come and kill half the village or whatever. And so this idea of contagion in the mythology and folklore having a certain association with actual plagues that are breaking out. I'm wondering, have you looked at all? I recall seeing a study on the exchange of diseases. So Vikings, they left home and went on far off
Hmm.
voyages, and then they brought home treasure and slaves and also diseases, evidently. And some people did some work to try and figure out if they could trace like how much and what did they spread, and did they spread it? Did they could a Viking in Constantinople have spread something from Constantinople to, Denmark and then France or so, and I don't remember what the conclusions were of this, but I'm wondering if that's something that came into the folklore as part of this contagion and the reason the Norse mythology has more of this than say others of the day is because they had more proximity to diseases because of their travels, just throwing a wild idea out there.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. I don't know if like a clear connection can be drawn um, towards a particular event, but I guess there was a mix of factors. Like they would have definitely suffered from all kinds of diseases, and upon seeing how the body changes and how the diseases are transmitted, they might have also put that in the mix, I guess. So in the sense that the sick and the dead, they could pose some kind of danger for communities at large. So this idea of encountering not only the sick but also the dead, leading to a further contagion through sickness. And as far as I can remember, there is also so this idea is also in other sources, like in William of Newborough, if I'm not mistaken, and he also uses this terminology, like the dead that become restless and then they sort of like make others sick. So I think that there might be actually a connection there. Yeah.
Yeah, are there any stories in the sagas of people coming back from somewhere with something and then that spreading in the community and then them having to deal with that?
Yeah, in the saga of the Greenlanders, actually, we have an episode. But the thing is that these illnesses are not really named. They just suffered from an illness, and they all died.
Yeah.
And then the explanation that the authors prefer is usually this one: like they died because they were all pagans, and they were not buried on consecrated ground. And this is something that also bothers me a little bit because it's not really clear to me what sort of disease they would have suffered from. So yeah, I suppose it was plague. I mean, it is perfectly plausible, but then again, there is always this like broader connection, also a bit of overinterpretation on the part of the authors who really dwell on this sort of like religious tension. Yeah.
Hmm. That's
Yeah, I think with
interesting.
the disease stuff, it becomes very difficult until you get more scientific ability to kind of categorize, because you can see even in, like, I know 16th century, they're talking about, well, they have the sweating sickness. Like, well, what is that? It's like it could be a catch-all for so many different types of disease. So, but
Yeah.
I think
I
that's a
think
good idea, a good concept, CJ. And what it made me think of is when I used to teach European history from like 1300 to 1800, and I'd had students read a piece from Crosby, who's a historian like from the 1980s, but he coins the phrase Columbian exchange with regard to European contact with the Americas, starting with Columbus and all of that. And he talks about the success of the Europeans not being, oh, because they had better weapons or because they were Christian, or a lot of the sort of means by which they would have convinced themselves that they were superior and able to dominate, say, over Native American cultures. But he said they conducted, unbeknownst to them, what he called biological imperialism, meaning they came with diseases that,
mm,
those people had no immunity to, and then they just kind of, wiped them out in that regard. And even though Crosby actually is kind of a big deal in that kind of theoretical framework, but we don't really think about it that much. And it's sort of weird. I mean, we're just coming out of a pandemic, but we don't actually, we think, oh, the Scandinavians go out and, they steal things, or whatever. They become Christian. There's all these aspects to their existence, but we don't really ever talk about like the fact that disease would be a part of that whole process.
yeah, and
Mhm.
interestingly enough, also madness is part of it. Like also, so they would have had some knowledge of, you know, what we today call those like psychological problems or something, because there are a couple of episodes where, so I can remember one, there is this reverend called Vigastir, and he after he dies, it is specifically told in the respective household not to come close to him. But then there is the servant girl who disobeys and does come close to him because you're curious about, dead people. You want to see what's happening to them and so on. And he starts talking. He becomes restless, and he prophesizes that she is going to die because she wanted to come close to him, which is what happens. So in the sense, and it is described that she went mad. That was the point I was trying to make. And it's not the only case. Also, Thorolfur, I mentioned earlier from the Erbygja saga, he begins to haunt the household, and it is described that the servants either left or died, and then he also drove his own wife to madness. So there is also this association with yeah, not only fear, that is like a very explicit notion of losing your wits completely after the contact with the undead.
Mhm. That reminds me of a story in French medieval history where a town faked, or actually, was it in France or was it in England? I think it might have been in England, actually, where they faked mad because madness was thought to be a contagious disease. So
Hmm.
they all faked being mad to get out of paying taxes.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
that's a
On
good
second
strategy.
thought,
Yeah.
on second thought, I do think it was England because that sounds more on brand for them.
That's very French of you, CJ. Okay, so then I've heard also that there's only certain things that you can do, according to sagas, to like dispatch with these people that have to do with like
Mm,
really weird things, like cutting off their head and placing it between their butt cheeks or something like that, and then burning them and then taking the ashes very far away. Or
yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so what
That's a
is that
yeah,
right? Is that
that's a
real?
very interesting one. It doesn't really pop up that often. It is what Greta does with Glomar. And what I really liked about that episode with the buttocks is that I did see it represented in the Northman. And I loved seeing that because that is such a specific detail from a particular story. But yeah, that one is very difficult to interpret. And I suppose it has something to do with the idea of spirits circulating through you and also like coming out of or going in your orifices. And I say that because I remembered that in Ibn Fadlan's description of the Viking funeral, there was this person who at the end of the funeral he covered his anus, and there might be a connection there. However, it's not really that common in the sagas. What is very common is indeed decapitation or cremation. But there are, again, it depends on the revenant too, because they do have their personality and their very particular circumstances. And I do remember one I really enjoyed, which is Clövey from the saga of Svartalf. And he actually continues to haunt people, although he is decapitated, because he uses his head as a weapon. That's quite a horrific image, but usually cremation works. So for most people, even for this character for Clovey, although with him I think they have to do something extra. They have to seal him in a coffin, in an iron coffin or something like that, and then put him away in a burial mound, far away. But usually cremation works. Yeah.
That head thing reminds me of now I'll have a French example of Saint Denis, which is, sort of patron saint of the church that becomes kind of the first church of the Gothic movement. And so he becomes martyred by getting decapitated, but then picking up his head and walking with it for like a
Oh,
quarter of a mile or something. So it's like, wow, he's got special properties.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, saints do all sorts of weird stuff. Let's Saint Philbert showed up at the battle between the Franks and the Vikings and scared the Vikings away. And you're like, oh, good. And Saint Aubin did that too. He showed up and was just like, oh, and the Vikings were like, ah, and at least that's what they want us to believe. I think they just got steamrolled. So I do want to come back to this idea of wait, just hold on. I have read Ibn Fadlan. I do not recall
Yeah,
reading the whole holding his anus thing, right? Where
yeah,
like
I
it was
Yeah,
do.
there is a character, yeah.
Yeah,
At the
why
until
very
did
the
end, he
end,
I
covers
and
feel
he's like a
covering your ends.
walking. But his butt is facing the ship, right? That the
Yeah,
chief
I think
is
so. Yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah,
So then he's like covering his butt because he doesn't want like whatever's the bad juju's coming from the dead chief in the boat to go in his body.
yeah.
so I feel like that's a detail I would have remembered. And now I'm kind of embarrassed I don't remember it. But now that you mention it, okay, so wait. So so he covered it so the whatever doesn't where does this idea that the spirit could enter through orifices come from? Like does it go out orifice? Was he holding his butt to hold stuff out or hold stuff in? Was he like, "Oh no, I'm feeling wiggly. My spirit might come out my anus." Like what's happening here? I'm
Yeah, I think Neil Price detailed it in the Viking way, as he tries to make this connection between magic and sexuality, I guess. And it is the way, I think it's a plausible way of interpreting it. Like this whole idea of having a spirit of some sort possessing you in a way. But then again, it could also be an overinterpretation, and we have no clue what it is, really.
okay, so I read Neil Price's book, and again, that is not a detail I remember what is happening to me. I have the
Although
book right.
detail, to be fair, Neil's book is pretty
It is a massive book, so
full
yeah.
of details. Let's put it that
Yeah, but
way.
it's good. I mean, I feel like that's something I would have remembered. I don't know. Anyway, because it's
Yeah, he
how
also
many
draws
jokes
this
can you make out of
connection.
this?
He draws this connection with the Volsathotter as well, like with this whole idea of the horse phallus, generally using phallic objects in that sort of context.
Oh, I
So
remember
yeah,
that. I
it
remember
definitely
that.
it definitely has an erotic undertone there.
What's like
It might have, yeah.
the later incubus, succubus, the dream
Mm,
state, spirits messing with you in all
yeah, yeah,
sorts of
yeah,
weird
yeah,
ways.
yeah,
The
that way.
violation in your most vulnerable state,
Yeah.
right? And so back then it was like, oh, demons coming to take my semen, and now it's aliens, right? What was it? I was oh no, I shouldn't say this. I watched that new movie, The Age of Disclosure, about aliens, and the alien abductions really follow the sleep paralysis playbook pretty well, right? But
Uh,
anyway, I was celebrating the fact that this movie came out because it's been a long time and I thought it'd be fun. I had this little chant that I did about, the anyway, I'm not going to do the chant because it's super inappropriate, but it had to do with the probing. So but again, it's this idea that in our subconscious, we get probed. So maybe that's what he was doing. He was just trying to not be probed.
All right, I just looked it up. It's like so it says the in Risala, so it's the deceased man, so the chieftain's closest male relative, and he performed a ritual during the cremation, which so for those of you who have read it, you'll know, but for those of you who haven't, this is so Ibn Fadlan is a Muslim chronicler. This is the early 10th century. He encounters the Rus, which were probably Swedish Vikings. We don't really know. And he witnesses a days long funeral and a whole sort of ritual thing of the death of a chieftain. And they put the chieftain on a boat and they sacrifice a slave girl to go with him and all this kind of stuff. So, all right. And then one of the few sort of documented pieces of evidence that we have potentially for the burning boat motif for a Viking funeral. But it says he was completely naked, this guy, as he performed the ritual, and then he carries a piece of burning wood, like a torch, in one hand to light the pyre under the ship. And then he walks backwards towards the boat with his other hand. He covered his anus. So there. So he's the guy who's, the relative that's got like, okay, dude, you got to go light the boat on fire. And he's like, yeah, there's a lot of bad mojo out there in the boat. I don't want to get it in me. So he like protects himself from that, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, there would have been like this sort of maybe taboo area, taboo landscape forming around this whole ritualistic happening around the ship, or maybe, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
separating
So
things.
weird. I could have just been Ibn Fadlan, that he because he says a lot of things in there where you're like, I don't think that's true, dude.
Yeah,
So he
Ibn
he might have
Fadlan is
thrown that
always
in there.
problematic.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean that would have been quite shocking for him, I suppose.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's also a bit problematic what he writes because of, him visiting all those peoples around and some all kinds of Turkmen tribes and whatever. So he might have maybe like put it all in one pot together.
yeah. So
Yeah.
conflating different experiences.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. Well,
Well,
so
and
I
they,
mean, you mentioned go ahead, CJ.
oh, I was just gonna say they were probably all intermingling out there on the steps anyway. It gets cold at night.
God. So you mentioned the Northman, and so that movie to me, and especially with Neil Price and what he specializes in, and his consultancy on that film and stuff. I mean, I think it did have that sort of um, supernatural kind of
It had the
vibe,
right,
with this
the right
sort of like
atmosphere.
voodoo rituals or whatever they were doing. Like for me, it's not my thing and not my interest in the Viking Age so much. So I'm kind of like, all right, pump the brakes a little bit on this kind of stuff. But
Ah, well, he filled in the blanks quite a lot. I mean,
yeah, right. Well, but I do think like to me it spoke to stuff that I think is very hard to convey to people in the modern world, and at least in my understanding of it, of this idea of these people who are so just unbelievably kind of embedded in this supernatural world, that humans are not kind of separate from the world. They're just part of this whole sort of experience. And, because nowadays probably most people would be like, oh, well, that's a bunch of superstitious nonsense that you need to cover your butthole because some spirit's going to get in it or whatever, right? I mean, like, what up? But like to try to get into that, I mean, can you speak to that a little bit maybe in your readings of the sagas or whatever? Just sort of the headspace of these people who don't think it's crazy to do something like that. It's like it's what you need to do.
um, yeah, I mean, there are definitely a lot of ritualistic happenings going on that we don't really know how to interpret because, so first of all, like you said, that some of them would have been so well embedded in society that authors didn't really feel the need to describe them. And then there are other things that are really difficult to interpret because of the Christian lens. So I don't, and right now it popped into my head, there is one episode about a door trial. Which is also very interesting because we were talking about Ibn Fadlan, and there is this idea of the door frame as well. And in this particular episode, we have a young boy of a farm called Kjartan, and Kjartan he's trying to banish all these ghosts that haunt the area. And the whole episode is called "The Miracles of Froða," by the way, and it's all connected with that woman I mentioned earlier, Thorgunna, who dies of disease, and then she must be carried to consecrated ground. She prophesizes the future bishopric of Iceland, by the way. But the idea is that her death, it provokes a contagion, and a lot of people die afterwards. And one way of banishing these ghosts is by organizing a door trial, which is very interesting in itself because you're gathering the ghosts at the door and you're telling them, hey, you don't belong in this world. Go away. So a question that might arise here is, what is that? What is a door court? Why would it have been so important? And how come these restless dead actually understand what you're telling them? Because it is my impression that they were not really that separate from the world of the living, because apparently they can understand social rules quite well. So this is one example, and the second example showing like this sort of blurring of the boundaries between the living, the dead, and between the supernatural and yeah, the normal, the paranormal and the normal, is Clovey I mentioned earlier, who even after he loses his head, he does so only physically, because afterwards he is still very much involved in the feud of his family. So we do have this sort of idea that there is still an ongoing connection between all of these elements, but at the same time, the living, like, they sort of like need to go on, like without these spirits haunting them. Because in Erbygja Saga, for example, the drowned people who come back as ghosts, revenants, they tend to occupy the space of the living. So they just go around the fire in the hall, they take their time, and then in the end, the living, they don't really have space to like perform their own, to do their own thing in the whole. So there is this like sort of combination between the two ideas. One idea is like the paranormal is part of us, but then the other idea is that the worlds should, however, be separate. Whether that is Christian or not, it definitely has some Christian undertones. Um, that's a matter of debate. But yeah, we do have, I think that this whole idea that the supernatural would have been much more part of what you were living than we're trying to do today. It's the same with death. I mean, death, if you think about it, is something very sanitized nowadays. But for people back then, it would have been something quite natural to see on a daily basis. And yeah, these stories would have been very well integrated, I think, in the fabric of society.
It reminds me of talking with again David Zori about like ancestor worship, and then so yeah, I mean, and the idea of what is it, the Fylgja, which
Yeah,
part,
yeah.
part of the little spirit that's in everybody
Mm.
that's, can potentially, sort of represent, like the guardian angel kind of idea, but it's somebody probably who's ancestrally connected to you or something. But that, so yeah, so those people are kind of, even though they've passed away, they're still always with you. But then when it comes to some of these revenant types who maybe did something shameful or whatever to get into the sort of category of being a revenant rather than like a good ghost or whatever, that part of that too has to do with the fact that they are excluded then from ancestor worship somehow. And so to me, it always sort of reminds me of like the punishment of outlawry, which is so common
Yeah.
in the sagas and stuff, and in the at least in the Karakas, you see the Icelandic law codes that it almost feels to me like outlawry after death, right? Like just go away. We don't want your, we're not going to associate with you anymore. So is that your understanding
Yeah, it's
also?
quite similar. I mean, if you think about it, outlaws, they're also some kind of monsters, right? Because they're like between spaces, they move around between spaces as well. And yeah, I'm gonna go back to Epic Saga because it's like the best saga for that kind of episodes. Um, so Thorolfur, he does really have a good relationship with his son Arnkel, but even after he dies, Arnkel is not really that thrilled by the idea that he has to like cremate the body of his father. He tries to move him first, like he really tries to keep him in a way close to him. And on the other hand, Thorolfur, who, yeah, after several episodes of haunting, especially after he has these after he causes this contagion with the shepherds and his wife and so on. He eventually is cremated. He turns into a bull because the ashes are eaten by a cow, which is again something very, very fascinating. And as a bull, he actually manages to avenge his son. His son is killed by someone. So even after death, or in the undead state, or whatever state he was in, he is still very much involved in this whole feud logic of the society. And the hauntings, they do stop at some point after his son dies, but then they begin again. So it's very interesting to notice this whole dynamic of either belonging to society, not belonging to society, like this sort of liminality at work.
So what do you think this liminality tells us about Norse views on the afterlife, right? So if I'm going to Valhalla or Folkvanger or whatever, and I'm having a great time in either of those places, and then just suddenly I just feel my bones rattle a little bit and poof, somebody disturbed my grave and I'm back and it's like, oh, I don't want to be here. I like so what I mean what is this? Are there any inferences we can make? Has this idea of revenants kind of informed us on because it's like did they believe in the afterlife or was that like what's going on really?
Yeah, that's a very good question because when I started reading these episodes, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to find some hardcore paganism in these stories. But then the more I read, the more I realized, this is not really pagan, this is Christian. So, yeah, sadly, it is in that direction. They're very Christian, and I think they show a tension that was happening at the beginning of the church was they developed these concepts of the afterlife because you essentially have a conflict here going on between the ideas of Augustine and the ideas of Gregory. Like Augustine, he was convinced that there is this sort of complete separation between your bodily, your material part, your very corporeal part, and then there was the soul, the spirit, which was very non-corporeal. But then there was Gregory who said, yeah, but it's not that simple. And if someone can come back after they die, that is actually proof that there is an afterlife. So your soul, in a way, it could also be materialized. And I think this is actually what happens here, because we can draw parallels to other sources, like Tietmat of Merseburg, who also has some horrific stories to tell. And what I think is that we're having here to do with a mix of beliefs. So there would have been some pagan echoes. For example, this idea that in a way you sort of like live in your mound. So you may be in Valhall at some point, but at the same time you can be in your mound. And as evidence, we can bring here the second lay of Helgi, Helga Kvidar Hundingsbana 2, where we have the hero Helgi who dies, and it is described very explicitly that he journeys with Odin. But then again, he's also residing in his mound because his wife, the Valkyria Sigrun, manages to have an encounter with him, even an erotic encounter. So yeah, we have these contradictory beliefs, these remnants of pagan beliefs, but at the same time, we do have very much of these Christian conundrums about what it really meant to be dead and what the spirit really meant. It is very unclear to me, for example, if we were to extrapolate this whole belief in the multi-part soul, like this is a very pre-Christian thing, that the fact that you don't have a soul, but it's made up of several parts. Like you mentioned the Fylgja earlier, we have the Hamminga as well, like the luck, and we also have Ond, which is the breath of life, and so on. It's very unclear what actually remains of these revenants, because you have some examples where you see them talk, you see them speaking verse even. Like some of them are poets. So it's very difficult to say what part of the soul survives. But then if you rather interpret it from a Christian perspective, that will really make a bit more sense.
Oh.
Okay. Okay.
I'm disappointed. Yeah.
Disappointing.
Follow me on this though. Is there any evidence for these revenants before the Christianization of Scandinavia? I think
That's
that's
a really good
important.
question. Yeah. Um, well, again, I can go back to Titmar and say that he mentions some Slavic beliefs, and we can extrapolate from there that pre-Christian peoples would have had some general maybe belief about that sort of thing. But we do have a couple of interesting rune stones, although I think this might be a little bit of an overinterpretation. So we have a couple of rune stones in Denmark, for example, like the Gerlev stone, where on the monument it is mentioned something like use this monument well. And that could be in a way interpreted as like stay there, don't come back. So it might be a reverberation of some sort of fear of people coming back after they die. But I think that kind of like developed in time in like these very coherent stories the way we have them in the saga. So I think what is valid is the idea in this possibility of the dead actually coming back to haunt you. I think that
Yeah.
would have been plausible.
Yeah, I think that to me that screams that. It's sort of like the fear is the key thing. Like you don't have a fear like just in case. You have a fear because you think it can happen.
Hmm.
Like you believe
Right.
that to be a reality. Yeah.
Because I was just thinking, this idea that people being buried in ships, right, which kind of says the expectations that you're going to go somewhere, right, and then cremation kind of being the norm
Mm.
in Scandinavia, also pointing to this idea that oh, you're going to go to this different place that is non-corporeal, non-physical. I was just wondering if maybe the Christianization of Scandinavia is what gave birth to this idea of the revenant or that the spirit still lives in the mound. Because if you think about the foundations of Christianity, I mean, it's a giant cult that worships a zombie, right? As Jesus comes back from the dead. And by the way, he's buried in a cave, which is, the Scandinavians probably were like, okay, so far the story makes sense.
Mm.
They bury him in the cave, then they open the cave, and he's gone. I'm sure that would have been like a horror story for the first Scandinavians. Just like, what? He's gone? Grave
He's
robbers?
out.
No, that the stone was closed. Where did he go? And so now they're all freaked out that everybody they bury in the mound is going to disappear like Jesus, right? Like, I wonder if there's some kind of like complete misunderstanding of how that's supposed to work. And then it just turned into a meme for everybody. And so now they're afraid of these revenants because they're like, well, if Jesus could do it, there everyone can, like
I'm thinking it doesn't be like it to me it sounds like it would be confirmation like you were saying earlier. They were like, "Oh yeah, cave, mound, guy, gone, whatever." Like, check. Yep, that's exactly
oh
how we understand
yeah,
the world. So,
I see that. Yeah, where the other side is if they already thought that people could be revenants. But that's why I ask if there's
yeah.
evidence
Yeah.
before Christianity got into Scandinavia, because if they had that belief before, then yes, then they're sitting there with their popcorn. I'm just kidding, but they're
Yeah.
sitting there with their popcorn, and then there's like, and then he's gone. And they're like, oh yeah, he's probably sitting back at home at the fire, like.
Yeah, it's
But
in the mix. I
yeah.
think it's in the mix. Yeah. And then there's also the idea of, what these burial mounds would have, uh, how they would have been interpreted by these people, because they would have seen them, they would have seen them in the landscape, and they would have thought about them in the sense of reminders of ancestry, reminders of how landscape changed, and how we can integrate them into forming a new identity, a new collective identity. So they're very often, not that often, but they are quite often mentioned in the sagas, unlike other types of burials, which aren't really mentioned. And they're also mentioned in stories like, if you go sit on a mound, you're going to get prophetic inspiration, or you're going to become a poet. There is a story exactly about that. So there is a poet, Thorleifr, who dies, and then there is this shepherd who doesn't know how to write poetry, but he really wants to. And he spends the night on the Mount of the Poet, and he bothers him so much in the mound that the poet comes back and he pulls his tongue and he recites a verse, and he essentially tells him, if you can remember this verse, you are going to be a good poet. So the fact that he sat on the mound essentially brought him poetic inspiration. So they were wondering about how to interact with these mounds, because they were like the most persistent images of the pagan past that you could find, I suppose.
All right.
They
Well,
were
how about,
also,
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, the mound people would have been the rich elites too, right? So can you
Exactly.
imagine? Can you imagine if we did that today? And it's just like, not only do we have to put up with Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk in life, but then we're constantly reminded, yes, we know you're really rich. It's like
Oh my God. That was not an image I would have liked to have in my head, but okay.
Okay, all right. So then let's switch to I want to go back to like the dealing with the bodies of these dead people that become maybe problematic or whatever. So, two things that I've read about. So, and then obviously we don't really know, I think, at least archaeologically. So, some of the argument about some of the skeletons that have been found archaeologically with like maybe large stones placed over
Yeah,
them, or
yeah.
somehow the body having been severed, either decapitation
Mm,
or a spine broken or something like that, maybe believed to be sort of in all of these things in attempts to keep that person from mobilizing again. And then the other part was the dealing with the dead. Like, so what's the deal with the death door? Like, so carve a hole in the wall and take them out, and then
mm.
seal it back up, and then they can't come back in that way. So is that? I mean, I'm imagining that that's probably showing up in a saga somewhere, and that's where that comes
That's
from.
an Edvige saga, yeah. That's
Yeah.
Thorolfur again.
Ah, okay. Your
A favorite,
favorite.
yeah. Thorolfur, yeah. Thorolf Lamefoot. Yeah, exactly. So he has an interesting way to die. He has an interesting way to die, because he dies in anger following a dispute because his son does not want to help him gain some woodland or something like that. And he's so angry that he dies, and he dies terribly at his table, and he remains like sat in his seat. And what they do is like all this sort of ritual in order to prevent him from coming back. So first of all, they try not to go in front of him, so to avoid being seen by the undead or the dead, because he's not undead yet. Okay, and then they do punch a hole into the wall, and they try to drag him out through that hole, so not the door. And well, the most logical explanation would be to keep him separate now in his own world, the world of the dead, and to prevent him from coming back. So yeah,
And so the
which
art.
doesn't really help for obvious
Yeah.
reasons.
that story
Yeah.
makes me so happy. So especially during like Halloween, my wife loves to watch all the like paranormal ghost stuff.
Mhm.
Right. And it's weird because I always wonder about this. How is it that people die and then when they're ghosts, they have all these ghosty wosty powers and they're able to be more powerful in ghost life than they are in real life? It makes no sense. But then this story that you brought up fits that because I can't I'm not sure what it's Thorgil. So anyway,
Þorólfur.
Thorvil,
Þorólfur
yeah,
Bægifótur, yeah.
that guy, where he's looking at his kid. I'm gonna use this at the dinner table one day. He looks at his kid. He's not happy with him. He goes, you better clean up your act, boyo, or so help me, I will die on purpose to come back and haunt you with all my ghosty woosty powers.
Yeah. Yeah, they're generally described as large, heavy, very bloated. On a couple of occasions, the horses cannot carry the corpse and they die, or the bulls carrying the corpse, they die. And yeah, blue as death or something like that. That probably has to do with the fact that it didn't really understand the processes going on when you died. And yeah, some of the observations are actually quite accurate. Like your body bloating is something that biologically happens. But yeah, they're described as being very, very powerful at any rate. Like, I
Oh
think this
yeah.
was something also used in 28 years later, the way they depicted the berserkers or whatever it is, the undead berserkers they depicted in the new zombie
The
movie.
Oh, you mean 28 years later? I haven't seen. Is
Yeah,
it
the
out?
newest
I
one.
haven't seen that.
Yeah, it's been out for a while.
Oh, I had meant to. Well, we moved across the Atlantic, and I kind of disappeared for 6 months. But whatever, it's just I fell behind. I'll have to check that out. Okay, so we have Berserker zombies in 28
Yeah,
years
yeah,
later.
yeah.
I will watch that when the baby goes to bed tonight, and then yeah, and then if he screams
Yeah.
again, I'll just be like, "So help me, I will die and become a Berserker zombie and haunt you."
I mean, that does actually make me think of something, kind of related, actually. So like a week ago, we my father-in-law passed away, well, almost 3 years ago, and he was cremated, and so we've just had his ashes and just kind of okay, now it's time to. And so my husband and I have a Christmas tree farm, and we finally spread his ashes on our farm, and the siblings were there, and we were sort of talking about, because I mean, like you say, Irina, like we're so weird about death, I think, in the modern world, at least
Mm.
in American culture, we are. It's very sanitized and you don't really have a lot to do with it directly. And so just to see you sort of taking this powder and kind of sprinkling it, it's like, that's a person, And it was just, I don't know, it's kind of an interesting experience. And then one of the family members mentioned something about going to a clairvoyant and, potentially, hearing from the father-in-law, etc. And it was like making me think of, like when it was all the craze in the 19th century, of having
Oh, the
seances,
seances,
right? And
yeah.
people coming. And so like how hard we go, the lengths that we go to like, try to reconnect or communicate with the dead. And it sounds like in the Viking Age, half the time they're like, go away, just
Yeah.
like you're such a pest, we don't want you here anymore.
Or you sort them out on purpose, which was,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Like
Yeah,
So
they're
we
also
have such a,
described as having a terrible stench. So the ones who are in the mounds, and you have all these heroes going to them in order to rob them of their treasures or for some different reason. So yeah, we have a couple of tropes here as well. So you have to wrestle them, so don't fight with a sword. And then there's also it is described as a great stench, and it seems not to have. I mean, it does have a connection with being dead, but it's also kind of like used as a barrier to the living. Like, don't come anywhere near me. So yeah, they had this very bizarre, ambivalent
I wonder if that was why
relationship
they
to the
were,
mounts.
yeah, or and why they were like sometimes bending or breaking the swords. Would that be so that the dead couldn't use them? Maybe.
Maybe
Yeah.
I feel like a zombie
rendered them
berserker could use
useless.
a bent sword,
Like you said, his ghosty woasty powers.
His ghosty woasty powers. Look, I'm unbending the sword. He's strong, right? He's like, you thought you could stop me. So
They're
I
like,
do
let's.
have a question on the supernatural front in the Norse world, and this is something that I've explored in my writing. But of course, I sanitize it for my modern audience because, as I've said multiple times in the podcast, never go full Viking. It's unrelatable to modern people. But the idea of the witches, the Volva, the those who practice Seidr, the magic, where do they fit in with these
Yeah, those are
revenants?
also undead, sort of like.
Are
I mean,
they?
they are raised from the dead.
The Voluspa one is for sure.
Yeah. And
Well,
then apparently she's talking to another Volva who is dead. She's invoking another Volva who is dead in the text. So yeah, that has to do with Odin's powers, right? I mean, he is described as Draugadrotin, the Lord of the Dead,
Yeah.
the Lord of the Noose.
but didn't they actually exist? Don't we have a staff from the archaeological record
That
of
is,
a
yeah,
vulva, we
that
think?
is the
Is it
most
the fear
recent
cut?
interpretation. That is the most recent interpretation, and I've also seen like this very recent exhibition at the National Museum of Denmark, the Norse Prophetess, where we do have displayed these staffs of sorcery, as they are called in literature now. Like Leslie Gardella wrote a great deal about them.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know. My colleague from the University of Chester, Howard Williams, doesn't really believe in them. I think he thinks it's an overinterpretation, which is always a risk with that sort of thing. Because, yeah, the main problem when interpreting archaeological record is that they are being attributed this role like in death. People want to represent the dead people in a certain way, like a prophetess or a warrior or whatever, in death. So it is a way to shape their identity by the community that remains. So we are always a bit unsure about how these people would have manifested like in real life. But yeah, the possibility remains that they were actually prophetesses. And there is also an argument made about the Oseberry ship, that the person wasn't really nobility. It was rather a vulva, given the objects that were found in that particular context.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Interesting.
Odin does have that passion for raising the dead, raising armies of the dead, and this idea of raising an army of the dead is something that has echoes very, very late in literature. So if you read sagas like the saga of Hrolf Kraki, which also has a great deal of supernatural elements, and it's also very entertaining. It's widely entertaining. There you have the example of Queen Skuld, who at the end of the saga she invokes all kinds of things. I mean, it's really a great mashup of everything you can find in mythology, from berserkers to trolls to revenants to elves, whatever you can imagine from Norse mythology that is invoked in her army at the end of the saga. So, yeah, some things never die.
So,
Put up bump.
so, so if I die in battle and I go to Valhalla, I'm a
Maybe.
zombie.
Maybe.
Yeah, you go to
I'm a
Valhalla, but maybe
zombie,
you also have to
right?
be a little bit of a nobleman to do so.
Yeah.
I'm
All
not
right.
really
Like
sure it was reserved for everyone.
it's not a
No,
fair
only
thing.
half.
But you know how like in popular fiction they're like, oh, you go there and you get to fight and blah 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 blah, and
Yeah, yeah,
then they
that's
pretend like you're
mm.
as healthy and vibrant as in life, but actually you would go as a revenant almost, right? As a big bloated mass
Well,
berserker
if
zombie.
if you can interpret the Einherjar in Odin's realm as revenants, I guess. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah. So
at some
Valhalla
point they
isn't
are
a
going
great
to
place to
return.
go.
The Einherjar are going to return at some point. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that has been so prevalent. Yeah,
Yeah.
speaking of pop culture and so on, the idea of Valhalla and this relationship, close relationship with the development of aristocracy in the Iron Age. I think there is a reference in the new Mad Max movie. Well, new, it's not no longer new. I think it's 10 years old now. But there was this idea of the warrior. There's also a warrior cult in this film, and yeah, they linked it to Valhalla because yeah, why not? Yeah, which is why I like the episode of Helgi. Like that is a very gothic story, because Helgi is out there wandering with Odin and his ravens and his hawks and whatever, and then his wife comes to kiss him in the mound, and he's all bloody and dead, but that doesn't stop them from engaging in one last romantic act. But I think that's a very good example of how these beliefs would have also been contradictory. Yeah, so the idea that you are in the way, still living in your mound, but at the same time you're elsewhere. So yeah,
Hmm.
very entertaining.
Actually, that just makes me think of just the concept of memory then
Hmm.
as well, right?
Yeah.
So because when you said that earlier about like sort of having the last romantic whatever, like I'm thinking to myself, okay, wait, is that like in a dream state and then sort of the memory and the spirit of that person
It's
is me
not in a
kind of
dream
like
state.
I'm having sex with my, dead whatever, like in my head in a dream state, or am I actually doing a necrophilia thing? Like I'm going to the mound and like, doing a physical thing there. I'm like, I'll go with the memory one, I think a little bit more than the other one.
Yeah, probably, although in the poem it is described as very, very physical. So
Ah.
yeah.
Oh, I did read something not too long ago, and it's just totally escaping me right now. But it was talking about something with regard to the Norse, and it was a status issue too, as far as leaving them, like you said, they're much more familiar with death and not just, the relatives dying or whatever, but like,
Yeah.
slaughtering animals to eat and all this kind of stuff, right? But that, yeah, it reminded me also of like even the 19th or even early 20th century, like Victorian. So like you just, lay them out in the living room or in the
Yeah.
parlor, right?
Yep.
And then they're there for a little bit and people come and do their, but they were talking about like kind of the equivalent of laying them out like that, but that like the higher status they were, that they could still be laying there for like 6 months or something. And then so the family would be like really witnessing the entire process of mortification and the olfactory sense of that and just all of it would, I mean, wow. I'm, I'm
Yeah,
kind of
I
glad.
mean, so I think this links very well to what we were discussing earlier about Thorolfur and his leaving the house and not through the door, but someplace else. Because I remember that there have been archaeological studies done, especially in Norway, and I know there's a book written by Marianne Hem Eriksen about that, about the fact that we do have quite a number of sites where the burial mounds would have been right next door. I mean, you would have gotten out, and there it was, the burial mound. So they would have wanted this connection as well. Like, it was quite a direct manner to engage with these ancestral memories and to keep them close. And even with distant ancestors, I mean, if you look at sites such as Lindholm Hoyer, you also have the Vikings engaging with the past. You don't not only have the Icelanders engaging with the Viking past, but you also have, like, it goes way deeper. Uh, you have the reuse of burial mounds from the Bronze Age or other kinds of monuments. So yeah, people do have this necessity all the time of engaging, like, in a very direct manner with the past and trying to make sense of it. And I think from that point of view, the term embodied memory, used in literature to describe these revenants, is a very fitting one, especially if we think about the legendary sagas where you do have these heroes going to the burial mounds and trying to interact with them, like in a very direct way. It is described how they open them, how they descend in them, how they're searching for goods, how they're trying to interact with the people in them as well. So I think from this point of view, the sagas can offer us an insight into this whole idea of people wanting to engage with the past. They're not just entertaining or horrible stories to tell to your kids.
Yeah, yeah. I think two things come to mind for me. I mean, especially because, if we were going to be talking about the pre-Christian period of Scandinavia, when, as a lot of our listeners will know, I mean, other than the rune stones, we really have a cu culture that's not literate in the sense of the rest of, parts of Europe. And so it is built on memory and visual, audio, sort of experience of the world. The law speaker comes to mind for
Yep.
me, so if you're going to get up there and recite the laws from memory, one third of them every year, that it's what he's doing is sort of kicking off the events with a connection to the past, right? And then but the other thing is the use of the burial mounds or the kind of family cemetery plots, if you will, on the farm. Is what you were just saying about those things being sort of just right there outside the door. It also reminds me of the place at Mosfet because it is. There's a burial mound like
Yeah.
right there near the
Mm.
chieftain's hall. That too is it's a connection to the past, but also was viewed sort of, in my understanding of it, kind of over time as a kind of a legal deed to the
Yep.
rights to the use of that land. If you can
Yeah, the
show that
property
you have
rights. Yeah.
been there for generations by
Mm.
burying your relatives close on the farmstead, it's effectively yours to use, and people can't challenge that in a legal sense. So connection to the past is really important in this culture in lots of ways.
Yeah, definitely. They had a lot to do with social status and the property rights of farmers. And as we can see in later medieval sources, when they described who owns what, they do have references to the sort of monument to describe how large the property was. So definitely, yeah.
Yeah,
Also from a
yeah.
practical point of view, very
Wow.
important. Yeah.
Mm. It's more tangible. It's in the world. You can touch it. You can
Yep.
feel it. You can smell it, right? We can write everything down now, so we don't need that, right? But for them having that tangible something in the environment, yeah, it makes sense.
Hmm.
That reminds me, I used to, when in classes in the past, I used to say to students at the beginning, what I want you to try to do is experience history or engage it with all of your senses
Hmm.
because we talk about these things or we can look at pictures in books, but we don't know what it smells like to walk down the street in ancient Roman Empire or eat the food that was there or, a lot of, or just hear the, the ambient noise and stuff. It's gone to us and people don't think about with regard to sound, the fact that we can record sound and play it back, I mean, that's so new in human history. It's like what, maybe 150, 200 years old that we have that capability of preserving sound. So there's so much of the sensory experience that's kind of
Yeah.
lost to us.
Yeah, the ritualistic experiences as well, because if you think about it, when we look at an archaeological site, you see a snapshot of that particular age, of that particular community, but you don't really see like the performative nature of it, like what the people were actually doing, how they were engaging with the dead and with death, and what sort of rituals were they developing, and so on. Like were they crying, were they lamenting, how were they actually sacrificing? Like all these elements
Yeah.
they would have painted such a vivid and dynamic picture of this society. Yeah, unfortunately, we have only Ibn Fadlan and the archaeology to shed a bit of light to them. And of course, now we can also draw anthropological parallels to what certain communities are doing in other parts of the world, and maybe try to draw these parallels and develop a theory based on them. But yeah, what we're definitely lacking is this like very vivid, lived religious experience.
Have you
Yeah.
been to the Lad Bishop in Denmark?
No, that I am going to do that as soon as possible. I did see the new Dem ship.
Yeah, so the Ladby ship, excuse me, is interesting, well, at least for me, because well, they've got the actual ship, but then they have a museum right there as well,
Yeah, yeah,
where
yeah.
they've done kind of like a life-size sort of recreation of it. And it brought all of this like really to home for me. It's just, and obviously it's just a museum exhibit, so it's not real, but and Neil Price has written about this as well too, of just sort of trying to invoke like all of the sounds and smells and different things that would be going on in one of these kind of ritualized burial acts. Basically, it's very performative, and but you see the sort of the horses that were,
Mm,
I think there was like 11 of them, and then there were like three dogs, I think, and then there's a guy laid out on the bed and whatever. But then you're sort of like putting together in your mind, like, okay, how did that go? Like, I mean, I'm sure like when they kill the first horse, the
it
rest of
was
the
very
horses are,
bloody.
yeah,
Yeah,
like bloody, but also like then
very
animals are
gory. Yeah.
probably making like weird, noises, fearful noises. And like you say, people they're probably crying, or maybe there's like a bunch of drinking going on. So there's like, a whole, I mean, it's just like this really
It's
electrified
very
sort of,
visceral. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And it was just like for the weirdest of reasons I don't even know, like just standing in front of this fake museum exhibit, all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, this is what it would have felt like. You know what I mean? In some kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
tiny way.
yeah,
It
yeah,
just made it kind of
definitely.
real. And it's like it's so hard, like you said, to put ourselves in that headspace.
Right.
All right, CJ, you got to write a scene in your book. So like some big, huge mound, like burial, like just throw everything at it. Put berserkers in there, vulva, lots of mead or ale, dead
I did
animals.
one. I did one in an early book. It was a big, burial, dragged a ship, buried it underground, did a whole thing, built
Or
scaffolding,
waking up
collapsed
your
it.
undead father because he still has some inheritance to give you, like Hervor
Yeah.
does in
Yeah, I mean,
Angantyr. Yeah,
it's
The
that's
Waking of Angantyr. That is a great poem. Yeah.
it's the particularity of the character that I write about is he's so immersed in other cultures because he spends his life abroad essentially, and so he just doesn't he this remember I'm writing for a modern audience, so he has to be relatable, right? So he kind of sees it all as kind of ghosty wosty superstition, and a few supernatural things happen to him,
Mm.
and then he doesn't put too much stock into it. But as he gets older and he opens himself up a little bit more, when he's young, he just kind of ignores it and he's just really laser focused on what his goal is, which is usually to kill somebody and then get rich. And then as he gets older, he starts opening up a little bit, right? And then as he opens up a little bit, then these other things. The last book that I wrote is I include a couple of characters in there that make it kind of fun, where they question, right? They're like, oh, I wonder. No, it's kind of like remember that movie Michael with John Travolta?
Yeah.
And he comes in, he's an angel, right? And they're like,
Yep.
you're an
Yeah.
angel, so can
Mm.
you like grant me a wish or something? I'm not that kind of angel, right?
I'm
It's
the angel of death.
yeah, it's well, also just like that's I have there's a vulva in the new one, and she has the same name as another one that my character encounters 5 books before, and there's kind of this lingering like, wait a minute, this lady would be like 90 years old. What? And but she's young and vibrant and she's having lots of sex and trying to have babies with my character. And so it's like, how does it work? Where does she come from? How does she find that name? How does she even know? Right? Because then they're like, how did you even know that? Anyway, so it's kind of this enduring mystery of like they don't, and then he never really lifts the blanket off of it either, because he gets attacked by Bretons and Franks and Vikings and
Distraction.
Moors at one point. Yeah, it's just it goes nuts. But yeah, it's one of those. That's why I thought this would be kind of fun because the Revenant idea and then this kind of the
They're a
superstition
great source of inspiration. Yeah, I
and, and
agree.
then trying to figure out like how do I make this plausible in a narrative, right? Like what's the it's like this phenomenon of the number of ghost sightings in the United States per capita is through the roof compared to Europe, right? But Europe has all the history. We have all the dead people here. I'm in France, and no ghosty wosties, right? But in the U.S., you talk to people, they're like, "Oh yeah, every house is freaking haunted over there, right?" But how old's your house? 30 years. Somebody must have died in it, right? I'm like, what? And you're like, I don't understand why. Well, a German research group about 20 years ago now did thought about this question. They said, why is the prevalence of belief in ghosts and ghost sightings and all that
Mm.
so much higher in the United States than in Europe? And they traveled the United States, investigating all these different sightings. They're trying to find a scientific answer for this whole thing. And what they figured out, there's a paper you can look it up. I don't remember the title, but anyway, but they put out this great paper that essentially demonstrated that ghost sightings go up the closer in proximity you are to a large transistor, electromagnetic fields.
What? What? Really?
So actually, another study in Japan that was done a few years later confirmed that our brains are susceptible to electromagnetic fields. And what
Yeah.
they did is they put a bunch of people in a dark room, and then they put a helmet on them, and then they waved an electromagnetic wand. And when they did that, people would have the same experience that they have during sleep paralysis. They'd have this feeling that somebody was in the room with them. They would see shadows and all this weird stuff, right? And so it kind of explains. And so the way that the electrical grid works in the United States is it's all above ground. In Europe, it's below ground. And so because it's above ground, then you have all these houses that are underneath
Huh.
these giant transistors that put out electromagnetic fields, and people live right under them. And it just so happens that when you overlay all the ghost sightings with a map of all the transistors, you figured out your ghost problem.
Well, that doesn't say anything about the Viking Age. They didn't have transistors, and
Yeah,
they're
this
like,
is interesting, but at the same time, I mean, not uninteresting, but it's kind of disappointing.
Yeah, a little disappointing. But then when I do my writing, I think about like, okay, here's the story people tell themselves. There's witches and gods and things and mounds and revenants and blah blah blah. But then I always try to dig into it a little bit, like you get the pragmatic entrepreneur who's just like, well, what is it really, right? I mean, is it
buzzkill.
what's really going on here? Yeah. Well, but yeah. Anyway, I leave
This
some.
is
I
what the
leave.
scientific revolution has done for us. It's taken
I
all of
know
the
it's so
magic out of
dumb.
the world.
Yeah, The
Oh,
Great Disenchantment or something like
Yeah,
and
that.
right,
back
Yeah.
exactly. That's a
and
good
but
title for a book, Irina. All
and
right, well,
I think it's a great place to come full circle with my last German joke that I have to throw out there.
oh, God.
Of course, the research group that figured all of this out was German.
Yeah, naturally. Well, to be fair, so I come from Romania, and I mean, yeah, there were no research, there was no research done on the relationship with the transistors or whatever. But I can tell you that in the past few years, we did have a couple of cases where graves have been desecrated because somebody dreamt that the people were alive or that the people were evil, like the dead people. So, yeah, that's something that happens sometimes. And there were even some people a couple of years ago who I think drove a stake through someone's heart after desecrating the grave. So, yeah, it's quite a strong belief in
Yeah,
rural
see, so
Romania,
there's
even nowadays.
yeah, the difference between that and the Viking Age is the Viking Age, it was just people doing that stuff is just like it's just Thursday. Like that's just how we roll around here. Here it's like, oops, got a little mental illness going on over there.
Yeah,
Somebody
it's just
forgot to
there's
take
a
their
lot of
meds.
superstition. Yeah, there's a lot of folk belief and a lot of superstition. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah. But it's also
well,
like, so my opinion is that these stories are very, very interesting and they have different things to offer. And yeah, it depends what you're looking for. Are you looking for the Watchman, or are you looking for the vampires? Are you looking for the more aggressive characters? Or perhaps characters like Gunnar from Njord Saga, who just want to hang around and sing in front of the mount, while egging on some other people to do the killing. So yeah, there is, yeah, there is something for everyone in, in that sort of story.
There's
that sounds
something for everyone.
that sounds like